friends, welcome back to Homestead on a Prayer. In case you're new here, my name's Jennifer, and today we are going to be talking about elderberry syrup. Now, as much as I hate to admit it, cold and flu season is almost upon us, and it's time to start thinking about how we're going to keep our immune system strong and how we're going to keep ourselves healthy when we're bombarded by all of these cold and flu germs. So we're going to be making kind of a classic elderberry syrup recipe today. So I'm just going to show you the different herbs that we're going to be using in our elderberry syrup. We're going to talk a little bit about the benefits of each one and why we've chosen these herbs to support our immune system. And then we're just going to make this really easy home remedy that has been used and trusted for years. So let's take a look at what kind of ingredients we're going to need. So not surprisingly, the first ingredient that we're going to need is elderberries. I have here dried elderberries. You can use fresh elderberries if you have them, or frozen elderberries. I have dried because that's what I have access to. Now, it is important to note when you're using elderberries, it's important to cook them before using them. We're going to be cooking them in our elderberry syrup, so it doesn't really matter anyway, so you can go ahead and use fresh. But the dehydrating process for elderberries also does subject them to heat, which makes them safe to consume as well. So I've got our dried elderberries here. I also have some raw honey. We won't be using this until the very end because we want to make sure that it stays raw, but it's important to have raw honey because that is what's going to give you that really potent antibacterial activity that we want. Raw honey has a lot more health benefits than the processed honey that you find at the grocery store. So definitely raw honey is far superior just to regular store-bought processed honey. Now you're going to need some cinnamon. I have here some cinnamon sticks. You can just use ground cinnamon if you want. I find the flavor of cinnamon sticks is better. I find that ground cinnamon doesn't really dissolve as well when you're making a liquid recipe. So I prefer simmering a cinnamon stick. The herbal properties in your cinnamon stick are also going to be a little more potent because they haven't been exposed to air as much and allowed to degrade as much. So cinnamon is a really great herb to include in your elderberry syrup and kind of in any winter herbal support that you're going to be using. Obviously, it adds a great flavor. Cinnamon is just delicious and comforting and just has that amazing smell. So for that reason alone, it's worth including. But cinnamon is really good at kind of stimulating your body, kind of waking it up and allowing it to respond really well to the other herbs that we're going to be giving it. It's good just for boosting your circulation. It's a good all around, just comforting, warming herb. The next herb that we're going to be adding is cloves. A lot of this is for flavor, honestly. It does add a great flavor. It has a little bit of those same properties as cinnamon, just the warming, comforting properties. So we'll be adding whole cloves to our elderberry syrup. Now, similarly, if you only have access to ground cloves, you can use those instead. I do find that the whole cloves give a better flavor, so I like to include those. But ground cloves will work if that's all you have. We're going to be using some ginger root here. Now, again, you can use dried ginger if that's what you have. I like the fresh ginger root because it has a much stronger flavor. It's more active medicinally. Now, ginger is just a great food medicine. I love medicine that is also food because you know that you're not going to harm yourself having ginger. So ginger is great. It's got the same warming property and stimulating property that cinnamon and cloves both have. It also has some pretty strong antiviral properties. So this is a great herb to support your immune system, especially when you've encountered a virus. So this is a great herb to include, especially in all of your winter immune recipes. Next, we're going to be adding some orange peel. I like to include this because it's delicious and also because it's really high in vitamin C. Now, the elderberries are also really high in vitamin C, but we're going to be heating them up, and that heat is going to destroy the vitamin C content of the elderberries. So we are going to be adding some orange peel, but we are going to wait to add this until after our syrup is done simmering. That way the vitamin C content of the orange peel can make its way into our elderberry syrup without being destroyed. Now, basically for the same reason, we're also going to be adding some rose hips. These again are very high in vitamin C, and we're going to be adding them once we're done simmering. While the elderberry syrup is still hot but not actively cooking, that will allow the vitamin C content in both the rose hips and the orange peel to be preserved, and that will just give us a nice vitamin C boost when we take this elderberry syrup. So let's get started measuring our ingredients, and I'll show you how to prepare this really easy home remedy. So you can see that I've got a pan here. We're going to add 3.5 cups of water to this pan, and I'm going to turn it on low while we add the rest of our ingredients. All right, so 3.5 cups of water goes into our pan here. I'm just going to turn this on low to get a head start heating this up while we measure out the rest of our ingredients. To our pot of water, we're going to add about 3/4 of a cup of dried elderberries. Now, if you're using fresh elderberries, you want to at least double the amount of elderberries that you're using because that water content makes them take up a lot more space. In that case, I have not actually made elderberry syrup with fresh elderberries. You may want to reduce the amount of water that you use. I would recommend doing your research on that because I only have experience making it from dried elderberries. But because fresh elderberries contain a lot more liquid, you are probably going to want to reduce the water content in your syrup. So we have dried, so we're going to be doing about 3/4 of a cup dried into our pan here. So there's our elderberries. Now, elderberries are a really well-known and well-researched support to your body's immune system. They've also been studied pretty extensively for fighting the flu. Scientific studies have found that they have antiviral properties and that taking a standardized elderberry extract is actually able to shorten the duration of your flu experience. So either way, I feel like it is a great support to your body. Now, it's not going to be any kind of like magic cure-all, make you invincible or anything like that. But I think it's a great way to support your body as your body fights off these seasonal illnesses. All right, so into our water, we're going to put that was probably just under 3/4 of a cup of elderberries. I'm going to open up our new pack of cinnamon sticks here. It's kind of up to you how much you want to put in here. I'm going to put 2 cinnamon sticks in. I'm going to just put about that many cloves. One of the beauties of food-based medicine is that you don't have to be that precise with your measurements. This is all made out of ingredients that people use for food anyway. So because of that, we don't have to stress about being so precise with all of our measurements. Okay, so the last ingredient that we're going to add into this pan to simmer is our ginger. So I'm just going to peel and rough chop a little bit of ginger here. Again, I'm not going to measure really precisely. I'll probably use a knob about this big. If it seems like that's not quite enough, you can add a little bit more. I'm just going to kind of peel off any of these like really tough or kind of knobbly parts here. All right, so it's about this much peeled. I'm just going to rough chop that and add that to our pan. Okay, so I'm just going to give this a little bit of a stir. I'm going to increase the heat to bring it to a boil. Once it comes to a boil, I'm going to reduce it down to a simmer. I'm going to cover it and we're going to let it simmer covered for about 45 minutes or so. We want to reduce the liquid by about half. Now, it may not reduce all that well being covered, so if in 45 minutes it's not really reduced, I'm going to let it simmer uncovered for a little bit. You do want to stir it frequently. One thing that you do also want to keep in mind is it's not going to really thicken up the way you think of it as a syrup. It's not really going to become thick like a maple syrup or something like that. We're going to add honey to it, which will thicken it a little bit, but it's going to stay pretty runny. That's normal. Nonetheless, we do want to reduce the liquid by about half. So let's bring it up to a boil and then we're going to reduce it down to a simmer. Okay, so our elderberry syrup boiled. I've turned it down to a simmer and I've covered it. We're going to let it simmer for about 45 minutes or so now. I'm going to stir it regularly. When it's done simmering, I'll meet you back here and we're going to add in our rose hips and our orange peel. So our elderberry syrup simmered for 45 minutes. It wasn't really completely reduced, which I assumed that it wouldn't be because it was covered. So then I took the lid off and simmered it for another 10 minutes. And it's now, after it simmered for 10 minutes, I turned it off and let it sit for another 5 minutes just to cool off slightly. Now that it's cooled off just a little bit, we are going to go ahead and add our orange peel and we're going to add our rose hips to the elderberry syrup. Then I'm going to cover it again and I'm going to let it sit until it comes to just a little bit warmer than room temperature. And we're going to wait to add the honey until it's just barely warm. So there's our elderberry syrup. You can see it's reduced, maybe not quite by half, but it's reduced a fair amount. Okay, so we've got our dried rose hips here to add some vitamin C to this elderberry syrup. So I don't really measure these, just kind of maybe like a palmful or so. Just add those in. And we've got our orange peels here. I'm gonna put probably about the same amount, just about that much. We'll add those in and we're just going to stir it up. Then we're going to cover it and let it sit. I'll probably check on it in about another 15 minutes or so and see if it's cool enough to add our honey. Alright, so our elderberry syrup has been sitting. It's still a little bit warm, but it's not too far above room temperature. So now we're going to go ahead and strain it into here. We're going to squeeze all of the liquid out of the elderberries and all of the other herbs to get as much liquid as we can out of that, and then we are going to add our honey. So here's our syrup. We're just going to slowly strain this in here. It kind of varies a little bit. Every time I do this, I end up with a slightly different amount of liquid. So let's start with that. We're just going to take our spoon and press on the berries. See how much juice we're able to squeeze out of those? We want to make sure we get all of this goodness. Since these berries are dried, as they kind of simmer, they're going to absorb a lot of liquid, and we don't want to lose any of that goodness. So we're just going to strain as much out as we can. Okay, so I'm going to put these spent herbs into the compost bin, and then we're going to strain out the rest of the syrup in the pan. Okay, so here is essentially what is an extremely strong, extremely concentrated elderberry tea, and it's got a lot of other herbs in it too. This would be what's considered a decoction because we actually simmered it with the herbs included for a little while. So to turn this into a syrup, we are going to have to add some honey. So I wanted to wait until this was cooled down to just above room temperature, because if you add the honey while it's still hot, you're taking your raw honey, killing the enzymes in it, and it's no longer raw honey. So we want to wait until this is cooled, which it is. It's just barely above room temperature. So now we're going to spoon some honey into here. Some people add like an equal amount of honey to how much liquid you have. I don't really add quite that much because I don't like it quite that sweet. One other thing that you want to consider is that the honey is what is kind of acting as your preservative. It's going to keep this from spoiling. Now you do need to store this in the fridge, but the honey is going to give it a longer shelf life. I'm not really as concerned with the shelf life because I actually store mine in the freezer. I'm going to put it into little cup-sized jars, little 8-ounce mason jars, and then I keep it in the freezer. My kids actually prefer it frozen, and that obviously is going to extend the shelf life quite a bit. And then you can kind of scoop it out with a spoon. It gets a little hard, but it's kind of like, sort of like the texture of Italian ice, maybe a little bit harder than that. If you're having trouble scooping it, you can just let it soften a little bit, and then it should be easy to scoop. So let's go ahead and get our honey added to this, and then we're going to jar it up. So I'm just going to kind of eyeball this. As I said, some people put as much honey as they have liquid. Some people put half as much. I probably am more in the camp of about half as much, but I don't really measure it. I just kind of eyeball it in there. And there's going to be enough honey in here that we're really going to get the health benefits from it. And as I said, I don't need the preservative properties as much because I'm going to be storing this in the freezer anyway. Okay. So we're just going to go ahead and give this a good whisk. Now, the one drawback of waiting until it has cooled to add the honey is that the honey is not going to want to incorporate as easily, but I think it's definitely worth it for the sake of having a better product with all of the health benefits of that raw honey. All right, so our honey is fully incorporated. It looks like we ended up with a little over 2 cups of elderberry syrup. So I have 3 of these cup-sized jars here. We're just going to fill up 2 of them and partially fill a third, and then I'm going to label them and get them in my freezer. So let's start. All right, so we've got 2 full jars of elderberry syrup plus a partial jar. I'm going to stick these in my freezer. I'm going to put a little label on them with today's date and the contents. And that way, whenever anyone gets sick, we can pull that out and we can just have a little dose of homemade medicine. Now, I do want to say there's differing opinions about how often and how to take elderberry syrup. Some people take it every day during cold and flu season as a preventative. Some people only take it when they're actually sick. We tend to be more in the camp of taking it when we're sick. So we'll take it if we're exposed to something, like if we know we're around someone who is sick, or if, say, we had to fly in an airplane somewhere where you're in a close proximity with a lot of people during a time when sickness is really circulating. So we'll take it then, or we'll take it if we're just starting to get sick. So the way we approach it is that if we're just starting to get sick, we'll kind of take it pretty heavily. Like we'll take multiple doses, maybe even a dose every couple hours for the first day or two, but we don't take it as a preventative. Now, do your own research on that and do what you feel comfortable with. That's what we have decided to do. That's what works for our family. So because of that, it makes sense for me to store it in the freezer because we won't go through it as fast if we're only using it when we're sick or when we're exposed to sickness. So as I said, do your own research. You decide which approach you want to take. But whichever approach you take, I do definitely recommend this elderberry syrup. Now, I do want to say I added a couple optional ingredients. The rose hips and the orange peel are not in most recipes that you'll see for elderberry syrup. I primarily added those for the vitamin C content because I just wanted to have a little bit more of a vitamin boost. If you want to leave those out and just have a simpler recipe, that is entirely up to you. Completely optional. As I said, you can find many recipes for elderberry syrup online. They're going to be fairly similar to what I showed you today, but you may find some with additional ingredients that I didn't include. So I hope that you enjoyed hanging out with me in my kitchen today and making elderberry syrup, just getting a little more prepared for cold and flu season. I do find it's best to have this on hand and ready to go before you get sick, because when you're not feeling well, or if you have people in your house not feeling well, the last thing that you want to be doing is taking the time to make this elderberry syrup. If you have it in your freezer ready to go, then you're prepared as soon as anyone gets sick. So now I'm prepared, and I hope that you'll give this recipe a try. All right, guys, I hope you're having a good day, and I'll talk to you soon. See you next time.